Hello, my name is Mike McKee. Today, I'd like to talk a little bit about Alteryx Designer. This is the first part in a training series that talks about all the different core tools and gives you a really good basic understanding of how to use Alteryx Designer. This class starts from ground zero, and so it doesn't presuppose that you have any knowledge about Alteryx Designer. In fact, if you've never seen Alteryx Designer before, this is a great place to start. What Alteryx Designer is it's a software application that rides on your desktop that allows you to bring data into this canvas, manipulate the data, blend the data, merge it with other data sets, pivot it, enrich it, run analytics, whatever is appropriate, and then output that data. We can bring the data in from just about any source, databases, APIs, Excel files, etc., even text files, and we can output it to those same basic sources. Oftentimes we'll see people bring in Excel files, manipulate, blend, and enrich them, and then go ahead and output it to, say, a database that Tableau might pull from or something like that. All right, let's go ahead and get started. So one of the things that I have included in the session here is a zip file with a variety of folders in here. We have the data input, and these are going to be the different data sources that we're going to use in today's class. I have the data output, and this is a structured location that you can save files to. I have the weekly challenges, and this is considered homework, right? So after we're done with today's session, this is a little bit of an exercise, and we'll talk about this more in detail later, that can help reinforce some of these concepts. The template is what we are working on in the desktop here. And then the data preparation is going to be the answer key, the finished output of what we're going to build. All right, let's go ahead and get started. First thing you'll do is load Alteryx onto your desktop, and you can download free copies of it. And then double click the session 1 template to go ahead and open up the workflow. Now, you don't have to have this structured format here. You could build it on just a fresh session. Now, Alteryx is divided into 4 main areas. You have the toolbar up here, or the different building blocks that you're going to use to build out your workflow. And it's divided into sections. We have the in-out section, which is bringing data in and out of the canvas. We have the preparation section, which will be things like cleaning your data, filtering, applying formulas, sampling, things of that nature. And these are going to be the 2 sections we're going to talk about today. We also have the join section, which is blending your data sets, inner joins, outer joins, things like that. The parsing section, which is working with date times or parsing out strings in a variety of methods. And the transformation section, which is just summarizations in your pivoting. Now, these other 3 sections will be covered in subsequent trainings. Now, there are a lot of different tools in Alteryx and a lot of things that you can do, but 95% of your time, unless you're doing something specialized, these are going to be the first 5 sections you're going to be working in, with the one exception of documentation, which we'll talk about later. All right, we have the canvas here, and this is where you're going to actually build your workflow out, just drag and drop style. We have the results area down here, which is where you're going to see data coming in and out of each tool, as well as messages. And then over here, we're going to have the configuration. And the configuration will change based upon the individual tool that you are looking at. All right, let's go ahead and get started. we will click the in-out section here and go to the in-out and drag down an input tool. Right? So just select the tool, drag it, and drop it on the canvas. Note that the configuration is changed. And obviously one of the first things we'll do is bring data in. So I'm going to set up a connection. I'm going to go to Files. I'm going to select a file. And in this particular case, I'm going to get Colorado sales data. And then click Open. Now in the configuration area over here, we have some options, and we'll talk about those in more detail later. And it gives you a quick preview of your data. And the main thing you're looking for here is, did the data come in correctly? And are my column headers appropriate? I go ahead and click Run. Clicking Run goes to this file on your desktop, or if you had a network share or a database or whatnot, pulls the data into the memory of your computer, and now shows you the results. Now, I can look at these results, scroll through them. Note I've got a little over 1,000 records, and I've got about I have 5 fields in here. Now, if I want to analyze my data in a little bit more detail, one of the things that I can do is I could drag down a browse tool. Now note that as I get the tools close to each other, they automatically try to connect. If I drop them far enough apart, I can go from the output anchor, so where the data leaves the tool, over to the input anchor of the next tool, where the data enters the tool. Right, note that on these tools you do have these anchors, and given that this is an input tool, bringing data into the canvas, you only have the output anchor of the data going into the canvas. Now the browse tool, I'm going to move down here, and you'll note that I can move the tools around so that I can organize my workflow and make it look a little bit more clean. I'm going to hit the Run button, which is going to bring the data in and populate the tools. When I take a look at the Browse tool here, you'll note that there is no configuration, but what it does is it goes into more details about each individual column. Right? Note that I have all my columns listed here. It tells you the data type for each column. Right? ABC is just text. And because this is a CSV file, everything comes in as text. If I go ahead and click one of the columns here, it gives me more detailed information about that column. How many values are okay, how many are unique, whether you have nulls. Not okay is generally leading and trailing white space, whether anything is empty. It'll give you the min and the max, average, so a bunch of more mathematical functions if you're looking at sales information or something like that. Little histogram of your distribution, and then a list of all of your values and how many there are, right? This can oftentimes be useful if you're looking at a column of data and you want to make sure that the appropriate values are in there. And maybe you have 10,000 rows of data. That's a lot of data to kind of filter through and sort through and whatnot. So it's just easier to take a quick look here and make sure that you don't have 65 states or something like that because they're spelled a little bit differently or perhaps even misspelled or whatnot. All right, so this is a great way of getting that secondary look, if the results area doesn't give you everything you need. Now, you'd most of the time run analytics and do things in here to filter data out or run some formulas on your data or whatnot. And then what you're going to want to do is go ahead and send the data out to a file. So I go ahead and I grab my output data tool, and I'm going to drag it down and connect it up. Note that it automatically connects up because I'm getting it nice and close. Configuration changes, but it's fairly similar to what we saw before. I'm going to go ahead and set up a connection. I'm going to save it to an Excel file. right? Note that it came in as a CSV, but once the data is in Alteryx, I can save it as any file type that I want. So I'm going to go ahead and save it to an Excel file. I'm going to go to my data output. And I'm going to go ahead and save it as output. And save. It's an Excel file, so it's asking me what sheet I want to save it as, and I click OK. And I could obviously rename the sheet. Now I'm going to go ahead and run the data. Now when I click run, what it does is it brings the data in, and then it sends the data out. If I click on the white spot of the canvas, I can see messages that are coming in through the workflow. I look at that. There's my input data here, and it pulled in a little over 1,000 records. I've got the browse tool that looked at those records. And then I've got my output data where it sent these data to this Excel file. Now, one of the really nice things about this is that these are clickable links. So if I want to take a look at my output file, I just click on this link right here, and it goes ahead and opens the Excel file. And here's that Excel file with that data output. Sheet 1. Now, one quick thing that I will point out is that if I hit run again, I get an error message. Right? And one of the things you'll note is if an error occurs, you'll get that nice red exclamation point. And then if you look at the messages down below, and I can look at the messages for the canvas as a whole, which is everything, or if I click on any individual tool, the messages come through right here for that particular tool. And it says that the sheet already exists. Well, one of the things to know about Alteryx is that in the options, when you are creating an output, by default, option number 3 here is create a new sheet. And it always has that by default. And the reason Alteryx does this is that if you're going to be destructive on your data, you have to make a conscious choice to do that. Right? If there is no sheet, it automatically creates a new sheet that's not destructive, and you're good to go. There are several options here, and most of the time you're probably going to do overwrite the sheet or range. But we also have append, so that you could keep, say, a journal or something like that. Or you could overwrite the entire file. And be a little careful of this one, because if you have other tabs in your spreadsheet, all of those will go away. So I'm going to change it just to overwrite sheet or range. And hit run. And I can hit run as many times as I want, and it just keeps overwriting that individual sheet. Right? I point this out because this is a real common thing that people run into. And when you run into it, you'll remember, wait, he said something about the output options. All right. So let's go ahead and move on to the next example here. So obviously, one of the places we start is we go ahead and bring data into the canvas. So I'm going to grab a data input tool. I'm going to drag that down, and I'm going to drop it right there in the canvas. Right. You'll notice that there's some very common things that we do, and so we'll be dragging a lot of data into the canvas. So I'm going to set up a connection. Right. Now, we've been going into files, and we're going to grab a file this time, but I would like to mention that Alteryx has a whole variety of data sources that it can access. Right? Most of these are by default out of the box, but there are free downloadable connectors you can get to go to a variety of other data sources. Pretty much anything with an ODBC we can connect to, anything with an API can be connected to. So just be aware that that is one of Alteryx's strong suits, as it can connect to lots and lots of different data sources out there. Snowflake being obviously a very popular one. Okay. So for the purposes of this course, though, I just wanted you to know about the data sources, but we're only going to use regular files. So I'm going to go ahead and select a file here. And this time I'm going to get sales tax due. and I'm going to open that, right? It's only got one tab, but if it had multiple sheets in there, I go ahead and grab the sheet that I want. I note that my column headers look good. My data looks good. You know, there's my first 100 rows. And I can go ahead and run that. And when I look at my output anchor here, and I'd like to note that this output anchor is exactly the same as this output anchor here. And I often find it's a lot easier to be clicking on the output anchors in this border as opposed to clicking them on the canvas. All right. Now, I'm also going to just send this file straight out. So I grab that output data and I connect it up. So this is just a really simple data pipeline. You know, an example of this might be I'm bringing in an Excel file and sending it up to a Snowflake database or Tableau directly or something along those lines. Now what I'd like to do is I'm going to go ahead and set up a connection here. And I'm going to save to an Excel file. Right? And in this particular example, I'm going to go ahead and save this as tax by county. And I'm going to save it. Right? I'm going to just call it as sheet 1. And instead of sheet 1, I'm going to call it total. And then OK. Now, I'm going to just head off any potential problems, and I'm just going to say override sheet or range. Because if it doesn't exist, it will automatically create it. And I'm going to run that. And what you'll note is that when I select the tool, go to messages, I can click on the link right there, and here is my data. Right? Simple and easy. I've got store numbers, I got addresses, cities, states, so information about the location of my stores here. And then I got sales information, et cetera, et cetera. Right? How many taxes are due for this particular store. But what I'd like to do, at least in my particular situation, is I have the individual counties here, and that's really the way I look at my data. And so what I'd like to do is I'd like to put all of the stores that are in Boulder County on one tab, all of the stores that are in Jefferson County on a second tab, Douglas on a third, et cetera, et cetera. So I'll have a bunch of individual tabs in this sheet that are divided on the county. Now the output tool allows you to do that simply. Down at the bottom here, I go ahead and click Take Field, Table Name from Field. And I'm going to go ahead and I can append it to the name, prepend it to the name. In this case right here, we're going to change the file table name. But also note, if you wanted to create individual files instead of just tabs, you could change the entire file path. Now, if you change the path, you would need to have a path somewhere in your workflow, which could be developed by a formula tool or something, and we'll talk about that more later. So, in this case, I'm going to go ahead and change a file or table name. And now, which field? Now, one of the things that I do is anytime I'm configuring a tool, I look at the input. Because if I can look at the data that I'm working with, it makes it a whole lot easier to configure any individual tool. So, I want to divide it by county. So I'm going to go ahead and select county. And I'm going to keep the output in, but if I had, say, a path that I had created, I don't necessarily have to keep that path in the output. I could just be using that as metadata to go ahead and create my files, right? The same thing with individual tabs. So now I run that. And when I select the tool and go to my messages, whoa. What you'll note is it didn't just create a single file anymore. I've got one tab in that file for each county. I go ahead and open that file, And I've still got the totals column because I created that first. But now you'll note that I've got an individual tab and it's put everything that relates to that specific county on that specific tab. So this is a really, really great way of dividing your data up into individual tabs based upon a characteristic of the data or based upon a field that you have created. All right. So let's move on to the last thing that we're going to do here in the in-out section. And what I want to do is I want to grab a text input this time. So let me go ahead and grab that and drag that down onto my canvas here. Now note that I've got my little plus and my minus buttons here. So if I wanted to go further out or go further into a workflow, depending upon what you're trying to do, you can click on those right here. So what this allows you to do is actually build a data set in your data itself. All right, so let's say I want to build a key. All right, so I go over here and I've got this little line at the top and I'm going to go ahead and click on that and I'm going to type in short. And that gives me my first column. And then I'm going to click on the asterisk here, which will give me a second column. And I'm going to type in long. And I can just create however many columns I want. If I look at my first row of data, I'm going to say ST period. So street. And then the long name for that is street. And then maybe my second one is going to be DR period. And then that will be drive. Right? And I could go ahead and I could build and create a data set here so that I could do find and replacements, that I can bring in a substitution file. Perhaps this is going to be, say, interest rates or something that's variable that I'm going to want to put in here before I run the workflow. There's a variety of reasons for doing this. Now, the advantage of doing this right here is that with the text input tool, it's only locally significant. So it's important to this particular workflow, but no other workflows, right? And this might be the difference between, say, creating an Excel spreadsheet or something like that and keeping a key or something along those lines in a centralized location that a bunch of workflows can pull off of versus just building something in here and so it's only locally significant to this particular workflow. It all depends on your needs and what you need to do. The other thing to consider here is that if I had a variety of information somewhere else, I could literally just copy it and paste it in. So, gives you something to go ahead and build a key, build a translation table, whatever is appropriate. I've seen this used on occasion for people that bring bad data in that's got misspellings and things like that. And they go ahead and put a key right here. Okay, this was misspelled to this, but it should be that. This is misspelled to this, that it should be the other. And it's only locally significant to that particular data set. And so they use this as a key to go ahead and do a substitution and clean up those spelling mistakes and such. All right, so far we've talked about bringing data into the canvas. And we can bring it in a variety of different ways. And we've talked about sending the data out of the canvas, right? Putting it to just a generic Excel spreadsheet or using the take file table name down here to go ahead and divide it specifically into individual tabs in a spreadsheet. Now, that's kind of the basics of a workflow, bringing data in, sending data out. But clearly, there's a lot more that we're going to want to do here. Okay, so let's go ahead and let's move into the preparation section and start talking about some of those tools. Now, first thing we're always going to do is bring data into the canvas. So I go to the in-out section, grab an input data and drag it down. I'm going to set up a connection, go to Files, select a file, and in this situation, I'm going to bring my dirty data in. right? Now, one of the first things that you are going to do when you bring data into a canvas is clean your data up a little bit, right? Most of the data that we get has some issues with it one way or another. It's got leading and trailing white spaces, it's got nulls, it's got garbage, it's got duplicate entries, things like that. So let's talk a little bit about cleaning some of that stuff up. Now, I talked about the options here and previewing the first 100 records. And if you notice, the first 100 records here have some issues. I don't have good column headers. You can see I've got some nulls in there. So what I can do is, first off, I'm going to say, okay, this is my column headers, right? Everything above that is just garbage, which is oftentimes the case when you get an Excel extract. So one of the first things that I'm going to do is I'm going to say, okay, option number 7 here, start data import online. Okay, my data is imported on line 5, and Alteryx will automatically look at row 4 as your column header. So if I change this to 5, and I refresh my data, you can see that it automatically pops in those column headers and starts it on row 5. Then when I hit run, and it brings the data into the canvas, and I look at my output here, you'll notice that I have good, clean column headers, and I brought my data in as appropriate. Right? There's a few more options here. First row contains data. Perhaps you don't have column headers, and so I can click on the first row, does contain data, and if I hit refresh, you'll note that it's not using that first row as a header row anymore. It's saying that it has data instead. Right? Now 5 is another popular one. Output the file name as a field. Perhaps you want to output the full path. And so when I hit run here, it's going to add an additional column of data, putting the full path of my data. This could potentially be used to replace the output file with an input file based upon information from your data to go ahead and feed this into an output tool. And so you might have different files being created in the same directory this came from, and you could change the file name or the tab based upon characteristics of the data in a formula tool. So there's a variety of different ways of bringing the data in and some of the options that you can play with here, but those are definitely the most popular. All right, now, if you'll note here, when I look at this data, I've got a lot of garbage in here, right? The column headers up here have these colored bars beneath them. The red means the data is not okay. I've got 4% nulls there, which will be in the orange color. And then the green is I got 64% okay. Right? And every column is going to kind of tell you that. And you can even look at this and you can say, okay, there's that little red thing. Hover over that, leading and trailing white space. And you can actually see the white space in front of those terms. It's not always as obvious as this. Right? If I go ahead and pull a browse tool down, and I can click on this and I can drag that browse tool down. But one of the fast ways of doing this is if I right click any tool, add browse tool after is on the drop down. So I'm going to add a browse tool. I'm going to hit run. Right? And you'll note that you see all that stuff in here. If I click on, say, last name, okay, unique, null, not okay, gives you some ideas from the data profile. All right. In the preparation section, one of the first tools that I'd like to talk about is the data cleansing tool. Right? Let me drag that down and drop that on the canvas here. Now, with the data cleansing tool, it allows you to do a lot of different things. And it really just depends upon what you're trying to accomplish. If you had no rows and no columns, you could remove those as a whole. You could be strategic or tactical. Do you want to clean every field the same way, or do you want to only clean certain fields? It'll replace nulls. So if you have nulls in your data, like right underscore here and here, if it is a string field, it'll replace it with a blank. If it is a numeric field, it'll replace it with a 0. And then you could also remove unwanted characters. Now, in this case right here, I'm just going to remove leading and trailing white space. But do note that there's a lot of different options that you have here. And then you could also modify the case to make it uppercase, lowercase, or title case. All right, let me go ahead and run this, and let's see what we got. Note that when I look at my input data here, I have the red bars and the red carets over here. I got the nulls over here. When I look at my output data, everything looks clean now. The nulls are replaced with zeros, which allows me to do math on those now. My leading white space is gone. You can actually see that everything is in a line now. Nulls are now blanks for the last name. And this is one of the things I really like about Alteryx, is that you can look at the input and you can look at the output, and you can see exactly what each tool is doing to your data, right? Each individual step. Now, Alteryx is replacing the data cleansing tool with the data cleansing pro tool. And let me go ahead and I'll connect that up here, right? And it allows you to do similar things, just in a slightly different format here. And let me go ahead and use another example here. I'm going to look at term. And my term is in months right now, but I really only want this to be a number. I'm not going to be looking at months. I'm going to be multiplying or dividing the term by 12 or 36 or whatever. And so I want to do math in here. And there's a couple of ways of doing that. But one of the things that I could do is I could select term directly. And I'm going to be very tactical about this. There's no leading and trailing white spaces in there. But I want to remove all white space and all letters. And it's only going to leave the 12 behind. Right. Now, again, lots of other options that I could do here. I'm just going to uncheck everything. So this is all that I'm going to do. And when I run that, what? Not supported in the original engine. I apologize. Let me use the AMP engine here. I upgraded from an earlier version, so you won't need to worry about that. You can look at the data coming in. There's my 12 months. Data going out. And now I've just gotten those numbers. So, a variety of ways of using these tools depending upon what you want to do. Use them holistically to kind of clean everything. Use them tactically to target one specific field to do one specific thing. So, use them as appropriate. In these, we also have an unknown, and we'll have this in a lot of different tools. An unknown means that if a column comes in that we have not seen. So I've been very specific. I have said, okay, I do not want anything except for term done. But if I click unknown, if a new column comes in here, what do I want it to do with that particular column? Do I want it to run through the same process, or do I want to skip it? Right? And this helps make Alteryx a little bit more dynamic, right? By having this unknown column, you can be adaptable to different variations in your data. So be aware of this unknown. You'll see that on a lot of different tools as we move forward. All right. Now, another one of the tools that I'd like to talk about is the unique tool. Let me go ahead and drag that down. And I can drop that on the canvas here after that, right? If I select this line and hit delete, it'll unconnect it. But I could also, if I wanted to, connect it to this tool. And this is one of the beauties of Alteryx, is that your data comes in here, but then I can go down any path that I want. I come down here and I've cleansed my data. Maybe I come down here and I filter out uniques. I come down here because I'm going to do some math and some summation, and then I can bring them back together. So I can take my data down different paths, divide it out, section it up, do different treatments to different organizational groups or whatever, and then bring the data back together or write it out to different files or use it in different areas or whatnot. So it really gives you a lot of flexibility. And one thing to also note is that I am building my workflow here and I can hit run. Nothing that I've not configured this yet, nothing that I am doing is changing my original source data. Until I actually put an output tool onto the canvas, none of this data is actually being written out. It's merely being manipulated in the memory of your computer. So feel free to play around with things, experiment with things, try different things. Until you write the data out, you're not changing anything. It's never going to actually alter and manipulate your source data. And I think that's a very, very important thing to be aware of. All right. So, unique tool. What the unique tool does is it says, okay, here's my columns. What columns do I want to be unique? And I'm going to say first and last name. Now, I'm going to go to the input here so I can see what I'm working with. Always look at the input when you're configuring a tool. And I want my first and my last name to be unique, right? You'll note that I've got Thomas Edison here, more Edison, Galileo, etc., etc., etc. And so what I'm looking for is I'm just looking for the top, right? Now, I've selected first and last name. I hit run. And if I look at my unique anchor here, I've now got all unique rows. Note that I do have a null in here. And then I've got all my data down here. All unique names. Now note that under the D anchor, I've got all my duplicates. So here's the other 3 Benjamin Franklins, the other 3 Dorothy Gerbers, etc., etc. Now, depending upon my needs, I just might want one of these. I'm just looking for a customer name. Or I might have a specific information. Right? So, let me go ahead and I'm going to grab a sort tool real quick to illustrate something. Now, I've always been just connecting like that, connecting to the end, but I can also take these tools, and if I put them on a line, it'll insert that tool in the middle of the workflow. And I'm going to go ahead and sort by first name and last name. And run that. Now, when I look at my sort tool, there's everything coming in. And there's everything going out. I've only got that one null row. I've got 4 Benjamin Franklins, 4 Dorothy Gerbers. And you'll note that everything is identical for this data, with the one exception of the score. And the score is different. Now, when I run the unique tool simply grabs the first record that it finds. But perhaps I want to grab the record with the highest score, lowest score, whatever. And that would be one of the great reasons to use a sort tool. Right? Not only for just looking at the data a little bit easier. So I'm going to go ahead and say, okay, let's go by score. And I'm going to do score descending. So I want the highest score on top. Run that. When I look at my output here, I've now got the highest score on top. And now when I look at my unique tool, it's grabbed the top record, which is the highest scores. Now perhaps I wanted the lowest score. Now it's low to high. And when I look at my unique tool, It's grabbed all the lowest scores instead of the highest scores. So I like the unique tool. It'll really help you get rid of those duplicates in your record. But just be aware that the duplicates aren't always 100% duplicates. And you might want specific pieces of information. It's also possible you want to sum or average the information up. There are some definite gotchas with getting rid of duplicate information if not all the information is necessarily duplicate, right? Sort tool is a great way of prefacing a unique tool so that you can organize the data in such a way so when it grabs the first row of data, and again, be aware, it'll always grab the first matching criteria and all the rest will be duplicates. It grabs the one that you're looking for. All right. The last tool that I'm going to talk about in the data cleansing, right? Because we've talked about cleaning the data in a couple different tools. We've talked about getting rid of duplicates. Let's talk about something a little bit more direct. Select records. Right? I'll go ahead and select records here. I could have connected it anywhere, so just be aware of that. And with select records, what it allows you to do, look at my incoming data, what it allows you to do is specifically say which records you want and which records you don't want, right? Let's say I want to get rid of this null. The null always goes to the top. It's customer ID 0. So I'm going to say I want rows 2 and then everything else after that. And when I run that, it's now gotten rid of that top row. Right? Or maybe I only want Benjamin Franklin, so I want rows 2 through 5. So instead of plus, I do 2-5. And I'm going to run that. And now I've just grabbed rows 2 through 5. Oh, maybe I also want rows 10 through 13. So I do 10-13. And so what I can do here is I can go ahead and very, very specifically say which rows that I want and just write them out here. Your examples up here as to how to get your rows, everything up until 2, only 3, between these, 50 and above. And so you could build exactly what you're looking for. Now be a little bit careful with this tool, and it's not one of my favorite tools because I prefer to make things a little bit more dynamic so it fluctuates better with your data. If your data changes, your row designations change, anything like that, this could potentially cause you problems. So just kind of be aware of that. All right. So let's go ahead and move on to a second set of tools here. So, like with everything else, and you're going to get good at this, let's bring in another data set. Let's set up a connection. Now, note that it gives you the recent files that you've opened. And I have already opened sales tax due, so I'm just going to select it from the recent. You guys have seen this data before. I'm going to hit run, which brings it into the memory, and now we can see it in the results here. Store information, and then some financial information, sales, taxes, things like that. Now, in the preparation section, we went over data cleansing, right? Now, this data is pretty clean. It doesn't need to be cleansed in any way. No leading or trailing white spaces. It doesn't have any characters that I want to get rid of. All of this is unique data. I don't have any duplicates in here. So what I want to do is I'm going to go ahead and grab a select tool. Right? Now, one of the things that you'll note is the select tool has a little star in that upper right-hand corner, and I can click and turn that star on and off. And as you start finding tools that you like and tools that you use, you can click on that star, and what it does is it puts those in your favorite section. You see little favorites over here with a star, and these are all the tools that you'll use on a regular basis. And so as you find those 20, 25 tools that you use 95% of the time, and that's generally what we see, you could go ahead and star them, and they'll all appear on your favorites rather than having to go to a section and search for them, right? And also note that the tools are alphabetical in each section. So let me go to that select tool and drag that down. Now the select tool is one of your bread and butter tools in Alteryx. Right? This is a tool you will use in every workflow on a regular basis, probably more than once. And it allows you to do a couple of different things. First, it allows you to select which columns you want to continue and which columns you don't. So I'm going to unselect all of these columns down here. So all I want is my total taxes due and my store information. Right? I don't care about any of this right here. And when I run that, my input has 12 fields, and there's all my records right there. My output, I've shrunk to 7 fields, and it's just got the store information, ending at county, and then the total taxes due. Note, we spoke about this unknown column. New column comes in that we have not seen before. It's going to continue on. So a great way of reducing your data set and getting rid of those columns that don't have any meaning. Now be aware, those columns are gone now, right? If you needed to maybe do different things with that, you could bring a second select on, hook it up to your main data set, and say, oh, okay, I'm going to get rid of everything except for those. Right? You might want to keep store numbers so you have a way of putting the data back together, assuming store numbers are unique. Right? And then when I look at that, this one's got the store numbers with the address and the total taxes due. This one's got the store numbers with just the other information that I got rid of. And then you might do different things with it if you wanted to split your data into 2 sets and work with the columns differently or whatnot. So again, a real bread and butter tool. Now, one of the other things that I can do with it is I can rename a column, right? Perhaps your column names that came in are garbage. You didn't have column names or F1, F2, F3. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to make the total taxes due, and I'm going to call this total taxes. And I'm going to run that. Now note that my total taxes due column, which is at the end here, has now been renamed just to total taxes. Simple and easy. Now I could also reorder these columns. If I select this column here, I've got my arrows and I can move that up. And so I could reorder the columns. And then I could also change the data type, right? This is a double, huge number. You could go ahead and Google the Alteryx data types and get a lot of information. But maybe I want to change that. I don't want it to be a double. I want it to be an integer. And so when I run that, you'll note that we have integers instead. Fixed decimal is one that I like a lot. So fixed decimal, 19 to the left, 2 to the right. And so now things look a little bit cleaner, right? The input didn't necessarily have 2 digits to the right. And now it's made it a little bit more clean for dollars and cents. So a variety of ways of presenting the data. Okay. You could also go back and forth between strings and numeric values. Just be careful because it has things like dollar signs, commas, things like that. It's not going to cleanly be able to convert it to a number. You'd need to put a formula tool in there and get rid of some of those prefixes, just replace them with, nothing. All right, so that right there is kind of the basics of the select tool. Lots of things. Be aware there's an options up here where you can kind of do things in mass. Right? I'm not going to get into it, but again, just be aware that it's up there. All right, so we've gone ahead and reduced our columns. We've renamed it. We've turned this into a fixed decimal. Now let's go ahead and talk about the filter tool. Right? So the filter tool, I'm going to go ahead and drag down and hook that up, allows you to do a couple different things. Right? I can do a basic filter. And so when I'm looking at my data down here, maybe I only want to get information from Mesa County or a different county or whatever county. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to say, okay, let's filter on county. I'm going to do a simple basic filter. And maybe I actually don't want Mesa County. I want to get rid of it. All right. There's a variety of things that I can do, right? And your operators will be dependent upon your data type a little bit. So, dates don't necessarily have the same options as numeric as strings. So I'm going to say the county does not equal Mesa County. And I'm going to run that. Now on my true anchor here, I've got 255 records. I started with 260, so I'm down 5. And on my false anchor, there's all my Mesa County. Now note that I've got a lot of different options here. Contains is a really popular one because contains, if it's anywhere in there and you don't necessarily have to get the entire thing, leading and trailing spaces you can get around, things like that. Does not contain. You could get rid of nulls and empties, which is another real popular one. So there are a lot of different things that you can do with the filter tool. All right, let me grab a second filter tool, and I'm going to cascade that here. Right. Oh, before I move on, one of the things that I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to add all browsers, and I'm going to run that. I haven't configured this yet, so we get the exclamation point. And this is one of the places that I really, really like to use the browse tools. So if I come down to county here, and I take a look at all my counties, I can now note that there are no Mesa counties in here. Perhaps it was misspelled. Perhaps there was something that still was in there. I can also look and see, is there anything else I don't want? And then when I look at my false anchor, it's exactly the same. I note that the only county that I have is Mesa County. If you did a contains or something like that, this could be important because this would tell you whether or not you were too broad in your criteria and accidentally grabbed more than you actually wanted to. So, love the browse tools after the filters to go ahead and analyze what you're filtering in and what you're filtering out. All right, now let's take a look at this second filter. Right now, for the second filter, I'm going to go ahead and I always start up with a basic filter. Right, and so I'm going to go and I'm going to filter on county again. And I want the county to equal Jefferson County. So let me look at my input data. I always look at the input. And here's Jefferson County. And I don't necessarily want to type this in. So in the results area, if I double click this cell, you'll note that it opens up a little cell viewer up here. If I click cell viewer, it closes it. Double click this, it opens it. And this shows me the contents of each cell. Right? If you had this is an abbreviated view of it. So if you had a long cell with a lot of information in it, this would be a great way of seeing everything that's in there. And you might need to put it in a browse tool depending upon how much is there. I can go ahead and copy this and paste it up here. And when I run that, I've got all my Jefferson counties. But for me, for my criteria, I'm not just looking at Jefferson County. I'm actually only looking at the city of Lakewood in Jefferson County. Now, I could certainly put another filter here. And I can filter on Lakewood. And there's reasons to do that. It makes it a little bit easier to understand. Oh, I'm filtering on Jefferson County here, and then I'm filtering on Lakewood City here. And it makes it a little bit more understandable. However, what I can do is I can also go down to custom filter. And the reason I always start with a basic filter is because it automatically brings that filter down. So I've got my first criteria already written up. And then I'm going to go ahead and do and you can see that as I type, it starts giving you your options here. I want that Boolean. Note that it's colorized. And if it is colorized, that means your syntax is good. If it's black and white, except for numbers are always in black and white, it's not good. And you'll note this is not good because I don't have a second statement here. I do a space. Now, I've got my fx and my x, and we'll talk about quicker ways of doing this when we talk about the formula tool. But fx is my different formulas that I could use, and x is my different columns. So, I'm going to click on that. There's my city. Click on the city, and I want the city to equal. And you'll note that as I'm building it, I'm getting that colorized version. And I want the city to equal, and I got to put it in quotes because it's a string, Lakewood. Right? I could have cut and pasted this also. And now when I run it, I've only got Jefferson County and Lakewood. So I can build compound filters here. I can do ands, I can do ors. We'll talk about this in a little bit, but we have a variety of conditions that we can do. So you could really get specific in what you're trying to do. You know, maybe I want the length to be a certain value, or, you know, a certain number of characters on the left to be something. I mean, you could really, really get into, maybe you have a regular expression you're going to match. So you could really get into details if you wanted to, or just simple ands and ors to combine what you're looking for. Right. Now I can go ahead and throw a sort tool on here. Right now, the true anchor is pretty basic, Jefferson County and Lakewood. For the false anchor, I'm going to go ahead and with my sort tool, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to say I want county, and I want that ascending. And then I want city also ascending. And when I run that, because I'm always using Alteryx to validate Alteryx, no reason not to. And I come down to Jefferson. And I'm just looking down here, there are no Lakewoods. So validating that I did filter out what I expected to filter out. All right, so filtering tool, select tool. You know, select being one of the really, really big ones. You'll use it all the time. Filtering tool, another one of the real common ones. You could do a basic filter. You could do a compound filter. It all depends on what you're trying to do. All right. One of the next tools that I'd like to talk about is the sampling tool. And let me drag that down and drop that on the canvas here. And I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to connect that up to the true anchor here. Right. Note that I'm a little OCD here, so I like to kind of align my tools and keep the lines straight and clean. To me, it just makes it a much more readable workflow. You know, I mean, if you don't necessarily have straight lines and things are kind of all over the place, you can see this is just a little bit more confusing to follow as opposed to keeping the lines straight and the tools kind of organized. It just makes it a little bit more straightforward. All right, so sampling tool. The sampling tool, you can use the group by if you wanted to, and you could sample things however is appropriate. So I'm going to say I'm going to get the first n rows, and I'm going to get the first 5 rows. and I'm going to run that. And really all that does is it looks at my data and it says, oh, grab the first 5 rows. That's 3 Boulders and 2 Jeffersons. Grab the first 5 rows. Simple and easy. Right? A lot of different sampling options here. You can get the last rows, skip 1 in every rows, grab 1 in every rows, a % chance of every row. Exactly. So a lot of different ways that you can do it. The n being obviously the variable to qualify for numbers. I can also group things. So maybe I want the first 5 rows in each county. So now when I run that, I've got the first 5 Denver counties, first 5 Adams counties. Garfield didn't have 5 counties, so I just got the first 3. But this kind of allows you to grab what you're looking for and do whatever sampling is appropriate. Right? Maybe I just want the top 1 store from county and city combination. So now I've got 55 records. Remember that I started with 255, and every one is going to be a unique county-city match. Now, very, very similar to the unique tool, this is going to grab based upon first rows, last rows, indiscriminate. Right? You've decided how it's going to grab things, but it's not really looking at your data at all. It's just grabbing things more positionally or by chance. So one of the things that I always like to use with this as well is that same sort tool. Let me drop that on the line there. Okay. Now, this sort tool will allow you to do basically the same things we were doing with the unique tool. Right? So maybe I want to say, okay, let's go ahead and take the total tax, or the county, and sort ascending by county. And then let's go total taxes and make it descending. So when I run that, if I look at my sort here, I've got Adams County, and I've got my highest to lowest taxes. So now when I get my first row, and we'll adjust this so it's just the first row by county, I've now got the highest tax burden for each individual county. So this will tell me which city pays the most taxes per county. Or maybe I want to do this descending or ascending, high to low, sorry, low to high. And so now I've got the lowest taxes paid per city in each county. All depends on what you're looking for, but I kind of wanted to point this out because the sort tool in front of either the sampling tool or the unique tool adds a whole new dimension of value to it. A lot of different things that you can do with it. And I think it's important to call out some of the tool combinations that are very strong. All right. Last tool that I'd like to talk about is the formula tool. So let me go ahead and drag down a select tool, and I'm just going to hook that up with our top data set here. Now, the only thing that I'm going to do here is I'm going to eliminate the total taxes due column. Now, formula tool is right here, and I'm going to drag that tool down and hook that up. Now, the formula tool can really do a lot of different things. Okay? Now, on the simplest basis, I can add a new column. Right, so let me look at my incoming data here, right? Note that I don't see anything because I haven't run things. Let me run it, bring the data up to the tool, and now I'm looking at my data here. Right? I've got my store information, I've got my sales information, I've got the total tax rate, right? Note the total tax rate is a percentage. So one of the first things that I could do is I could add a column. Now, maybe I want to know where all of these records came from. All right, so I could add a column. Right? Go ahead and click on the little down caret right here, click add column, and then type your column name in there. Record source. And this right here came from Salesforce, I'm going to say. So since it's a string, I need to put it in quotes. And you'll note that it's now in green there, in color. If I remove those quotes, it's black, and so it doesn't like that. It gives you a preview of your first row of data. Kind of boring in this situation, but there it is. You can decide what data type you want your new column to be. By default, it's always a VW string. So if you're doing math or something like that, just be aware of that. Now, making a mathematical result a string isn't necessarily a problem unless you're going to do math with it. Okay? So oftentimes I'll say, store number. I'll use that as a string. Who cares? I'm not going to do anything with it. All right. When I run that, my last column here, because the new columns always appear at the end, I just got that record source that always says Salesforce. Right? Perhaps this would be something I'd want to do. I bring my data in from a multitude of sources. I want to tag what each source is. I could also just add the file that it came from, a couple different ways of doing that, and then maybe bring it all together. All right, so I've gone ahead and I just created a column with a word in it. Now, other things that I can do with this, I hit the plus button right here, and that gives me another formula that I can do. So in a single formula tool, I can do as many formulas as I want to do. Now, be aware of this, pros and cons. The more formulas to do, the more difficult it is to explain this particular step in the process because you're doing so many things. So it does, I think, make more sense to group your formulas more by function. So, you know, this tool is cleaning up this data or doing X, Y, Z, which might be 1, 2, 3, 4 formulas, or even 10 formulas for that matter. And then a second formula tool right after it, just to make it easier to understand and make it a little bit more modular. All right, so in this case, instead of creating a new column, I'm going to modify an existing column. Let's look at my county column here. So I'm going to select the county column. Now, whatever I do here is going to replace whatever is in the county column. Right? In this situation, I'm just going to make it all lowercase, something simple. Now, we talked about this a little bit in the filter tool. If I go to the FX, here's all the formulas that I could perform in here. Right? I'm going to come down to string, because these are strings. The formulas are divided up into functions, so math, finance, etc. And then here's all the different things that I can do. Right? And there's a lot of them. If I hover over anything, it gives you a little bit of an explanation as to what that particular function does. I go ahead and select it, and it brings it onto my canvas. Highlighting string, and this is the string that I want to do something with. Right? Well, I didn't want length. I wanted lowercase. There we go. Highlighting string automatically. I go to the X, and I come down to county. And so you can see the first row, it's all lowercase, as these were title case before. And I run that. And now everything is lowercase. Simple and easy. Now be aware I can't change the data type because I'm working on an existing column. But I can do whatever actions are appropriate for that column. Maybe I wanted to multiply things, add things, whatever. All right. Maybe I want to do math in a column. Right? So let's go ahead and create another column here. And we're going to go ahead and add a column. And we will call this taxes due. Now, like before, I could go to the X here. And I could go ahead and pick my columns. And I'm going to pick total sales, for example. And then asterisk is the common multiply. But one of the cheat ways, one of the easiest ways of doing it, let me look at my incoming data here. One of the easiest ways of doing it is that I can type a left square bracket. And it gives me a drop down of all my columns that I can choose. And as I start typing in here, it'll start refining it to matches. So instead of going to the X every time to pick a column, oftentimes it's a lot faster and easier just to the left square bracket, type a little bit, and then I can go ahead and just choose what I'm looking for. Now recall, total tax rate's a percentage, so I'm going to need to divide that by 100. And you can see that my first column here, as I'm typing it, is changing. So I can see what it is. My total sales right here, about 125,000. So 10,000 sounds about right for taxes. Now, my data type here, this is going to be a string, which might be just fine for you. But I'm looking at here and I'm saying, $10,000, 0.3833 cents, just that's not going to work. Right? You can't pay that kind of thing. This needs to be rounded to two digits. And there's a couple of ways of approaching that. Right? What I can do is I can do a compound formula. So what I'll do is I will go to my FX, and if I come down to math here, I've got round. Right? There's floor, there's ceiling, there's things like that. And if I click round, X is going to be my formula. So I can take my formula right here that I just created. And I'm going to copy it over the X. And my multiplier here is going to be 0.01. So I'm rounding this to the nearest penny. And I'm doing this to let you know that we can nest functions in other functions. I'll go ahead and run that. Note that it's still a string, my output, but I now have my total taxes due rounded. Now maybe, note that I don't necessarily have 2 decimal spots. It rounded it to 2 decimal spots, but if there wasn't 2 to round to, then I can also make it a fixed decimal. And we talked about this a little earlier. 19 to the left, 2 to the right. I run that, and now it's got that nice 2-digit at the end, which, finance, accounts receivable, payable, things like that tend to like that look a little bit better. It's also now a number, and so that I could do other things with it. I could add it, I could subtract it, average it, whatever is appropriate for what I'm trying to do. All right, so the last thing that I'd like to talk about in the formula tool, let me add another formula here, is that we can also do if-then statements. Right? Now, everything that I talked about with the left square bracket, you can do with the formulas. If you start typing a formula in, it'll automatically give you the different functions that are appropriate. But functions are a little bit more difficult because you kind of have to know what they are. It might be easier to select from the dashboard here, as opposed to the left square bracket, and your columns are a lot more straightforward. So I can do an if-then statement. I can do if-then-else-if statements. The IIF, if you're familiar with that terminology. So you got a bunch of conditional things that you can do. Now, for me personally, the way I organize these is I have each condition on a separate line. So if C, then T, else, F, and then end if at the very bottom. Just makes it easier for me to recognize and work with. You know, if this was an else if statement, I might have multiple else ifs on lines, but I put each else if on its own individual line. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to backspace over my first condition, do my left square bracket, and I'm going to say, okay, if my taxes due are greater than, I'm going to say 60,000. Now, this is a number, so I don't need to put it in quotes. You only need to put the strings in quotes. And since this right here is a number, this will be fine. Now, if I didn't need the taxes due and I just wanted this right here, I could have just copied this whole formula here and pasted it in instead of taxes due. But instead, I'm using taxes due because I've already calculated that field above. Then what I want in here is I want that to be called high. And I got to put high in quotes because it is a string. Now, if it's under 60,000 or equal to 60,000, then it's low. And you'll note that as I'm typing, everything starts going into color, right? If I didn't have that last quote there, it says, oh, you haven't ended this else statement, so the end if is also not in color. 9 times out of 10, 99 times out of 100, once everything's in color, you're good to go. Check data types if you're struggling. If taxes due, say it weren't a fixed decimal, but were a string, this would fail and it would give you problems. Right? Note that because it's a string, everything went squirrely there. But let me select a column here, add a column. We'll call it tax impact. Right? Now let me change taxes due back to that fixed decimal. Right? It doesn't always flow through as fast as you might like. Run that again. And now you can see everything is running cleanly, no errors or anything like that. If I look at my output here, I've got my taxes due, and then anywhere it's over 60 is a high tax impact. Anywhere that is 60 or lower is a low tax impact. So when you're talking about the formula tool, these are your basic formulas here. You can create a column with something in it, just words. You can modify an existing column with whatever formulas and functions are appropriate. You can create new columns, based upon other columns, math, whatever. I could have concatenated things and made strings. I could do an if-then or else-if statements, so I could do conditional. This might be one of the ways that you would create different tabs for an output. Is that if certain conditions are true, it's tab 1. If other conditions are true, it's tab 2. The first condition that is matched will be what it specifies. So if you're doing if-then, else-if statements, the order of them might make a difference. So that's the formula tool. All right, that kind of wraps up the tools that I wanted to talk about today. But I'd like to talk for a minute about documentation. Right? Documentation to me is a big one. I've been audited one too many times for comfort. When I'm selecting any tool on my canvas, we have been working with the configurations here. Right? And that's this icon up here. But if I come down to the fourth icon down, the annotation, if I click on that, anything that I type in here will appear beneath the tool. This is a cool tool. And if I click on the white spot of the canvas, those words appear beneath the tool. So after you've built your workflow, or after you have the parts of your workflow kind of consolidated, I highly recommend documenting what each tool is doing. And this kind of leads a little bit into, do you want one formula tool with 100 formulas in it, or do you want maybe 3 or 4 formula tools that are a little bit more function oriented, so when you document the tool, you could say this tool does this, as opposed to having a list of 5 different things that that formula tool might do. Whatever's appropriate beneath the tool. It can be friendly words like we have here. It can be more technical words. Your company might even want to put standards together. This is how you document tools and the types of things that you say. First line of documenting a workflow. Second thing, and I'm going to go to the documentation tab for this, is we have comment boxes. And I can drag a comment box down and it sizes, I drag it up and size whatever I want. And I can type something in here. This is really interesting. Right? And generally I recommend typing in something here that is, describing what this section of the workflow is doing, notes for people to keep an eye on. You'll note that at the top of this workflow, this right here is just a text box. And I put up here to orient people. And so at the very top of your workflow, you might throw a text box in saying this workflow does ABC, written by me, uses these data sources, all the different kind of things that might help an auditor or somebody that is learning the workflow orient to exactly what this particular workflow is doing, why it's doing it, things like that. I've got a lot of flexibility as to what I can do in these workflows, or in these text boxes, the comment box. I can change the font. So let me go ahead and make that a little bit bigger and bold it and change it to, I don't know, some interesting font. So I can also change my text color or my background color. So maybe this is really, really important, and I want to highlight that in red to draw attention. Align the text, whatever. I could even put an image in here if I wanted to. So you could say put a corporate logo in here and put that at the top. I've seen people take screenshots of their run books in Excel when they're converting something over. They put that screenshot in here, and then they can go ahead and expand it so they can see and have documentation for what they were trying to convert over into Alteryx, things like that. So a variety of ways that you can use these comment boxes. Note that over here, all of these are just the comment boxes with text and colors and things like that in them. And then the last thing that I wanted to talk about are the tool containers. I can drag a tool container down, and I can take a grouping of tools and drag them into the container. They now move as a group. I can minimize it. I can turn them off so they won't run. No, nothing will leave the container if these don't run, so be aware of that. I can name this container. This does ABC. And so I can start to black box it a little bit. Well, yes. So that I know that this group of tools, this section, is doing something. And I can even put my comment box in there and describe it in more detail. So I might have 3 or 4 of these containers on my canvas, and obviously tools can come out of this. Right, so let me go to preparation, drag a select tool, and I can connect that up there. right? I can drag it in the container. I can drag it out of the container. The containers will automatically size to your tools, so be aware of that. Right? So I can black box things and say this does this other container does something else. And so I can have a bunch of these containers on there which describe what sections of the workflow are doing. And I can even put comment boxes in to more thoroughly describe it, tell people what to watch out for, whatever is appropriate for what you're trying to convey. And then I can also document each individual tool. And by doing this combination of documentation, you could really get a very, very clear workflow so that in the workflow itself, it's well documented for auditors. When you win the lottery and you're sitting in Fiji and your coworker comes over, they're going to really want to be able to orient to that workflow rather than having to interrupt your Mai Tai siesta to understand what's going on in that workflow. All right. I hope today has been useful for everybody, and I hope you guys have picked up a lot of great information. The tools that I've gone over today are kind of the core tools, some of the most common tools that are used in Alteryx. And these tools were chosen in large part because these are the tools that you will see on the core certification exam, right? So if you master these tools, the core certification exam will be relatively straightforward for you, right? Now there are two more sections in this training where we'll talk about the join, the parse, and the transform tools. Right. Last thing that I have for you is that I did do some homework for you guys to kind of reinforce these. And everything in the homework is specific to only the tools that we have gone over. Right. There's the homework right here. There's my start file and my solution file. I go ahead and double click on that start file and it goes ahead and opens it up. Right? And this is actually from the Alteryx community. There is a URL in the workflow. Right? Here you can see there is that URL right here. And this is a link to this actual weekly challenge. And Alteryx does a lot of these weekly challenge. I highly recommend you go out to the website and check them out. And if you want to learn, it is a great place to get some good practice and stuff. It tells you what you're trying to do here. Right? And this is just, let me go ahead and run it to bring the data up. This is just Netflix movies. And here is a list of movies. And it kind of wants you to categorize things and stuff. And here is the answers that you are looking for. Right? One of the things that I forgot to mention, and let me go back to the data preparation here. Once you have a workflow that you like, that is good, go ahead and go to File and save it. And save it as a file. And then it'll be a file on your desktop that when you reopen it, as you saw with some of this stuff, it'll open the entire workflow. You'll be able to run the workflow. That's really the whole concept behind Alteryx, is that you build a workflow, you save it, and then you never have to build that workflow again. You just hit run, and it automatically does exactly what you're looking for. In some of the later sections, we'll talk about the server and how we can actually automate this so it runs on a schedule. But the whole concept is that once you build this workflow once, and obviously you can also do ad hoc work, but once you build this workflow once, you're never going to have to build it a second time. Right? So, this is what you're trying to do. Also in that, there is a solution. So don't kill yourself over this. You know, if you're not quite sure where to start, if you've got some questions, go ahead and open and take a look at the solution. Here is the finished product. You can see everything is documented. And just by looking at the tools, you might say, oh, okay, I know what tools to use. I know how to do this, right? Or maybe you need that second level. Okay, how is this actually configured? So, again, it's meant to reinforce the material. It's not meant to struggle or anything like that. If you guys have any questions, feel free to go ahead and reach out. I hope this has been valuable for you guys. And this wraps up session 1. I'll see you guys in session 2.